there's a new variant out. It's the Omicron. And I don't know if you know this, Kurt, but the Omicron is exploding around the world with cold-like symptoms. So if you have a cold, it might not just be the cold. You might have Omicron, and you just go through life thinking you just have a cold.
Somebody I know just died from a COVID-related gunshot wound. So
okay. So what's going on? Omicron is exploding around the world, Kurt, but COVID cases in Japan keep plummeting, and no one knows exactly why.
Really?
I think I do. I'm going to tell you in a minute. Hold on. Spoiler alert. I know. Call it the hunt for a potential X factor, such as genetics, that may explain the trend and inform how Japan could deal with the next wave. While the new highly transmissible Omicron variant has appeared in the country and experts expect there is already some community spread, the overall transmission rate of the virus and coronavirus-related deaths in Japan has remained low. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, Japan has had a much lower rates of infection and death than many in the Western countries. True, though there was a severe spike over the summer that overwhelmed hospitals in Japan. In Japan, researchers have examined factors like weather, cyclical patterns in the spread of the virus, and potential past exposure to mild coronavirus variants that may have led to the low case and death counts. What? Go ahead.
I was like, do you think it could be Japanese anime tentacle porn? It turns out.
Okay. Experts have identified potential genetic characteristics among the Japanese that may have led to a stronger immune system response to the coronavirus, but said there needs to be more research to draw definite conclusions. Japan has now vaccinated most of its population and has widespread masking, which may explain the current low numbers. Well, if that explains it, how do you explain South Korea, where authorities are rescinding reopening plans because of a spike in infection and record numbers of serious and critical cases, and they're just as vaccinated as the friggin' Japanese people are? So how do you explain that? If that's what did it, why isn't it doing it in South Korea? That's the question. And Japan has barely begun rolling out its booster shots, lagging behind other countries in the region, including South Korea. So South Korea is even rolling out their boosters, and they're having way worse corona than Japan. What in the F is going on? Obviously, vaccination, masking, and social distancing are surely factors, but those alone cannot explain it, especially when comparing the situation to South Korea. It is unclear yet whether there is an factor X that exists specific to Japanese or East Asian people. But in determining this, we hope it can help us to understand and control. So they think that there might be something genetic in East Asian or Japanese people that is giving them some kind of immunity to this coronavirus. In the past month, officials' daily case count in Japan has ranged from about 60 to under 200 in a country of 127 million frickin' people. There have been fewer than 5 coronavirus-related deaths recorded most days since early November. Those numbers come with a caveat and probably are an undercount of the pandemic's true toll because of the lack of widespread testing, systemic contact tracing, or vaccine passports, and delays in reporting the deaths from municipalities. But even taking into account the underreporting, the number of cases and fatalities are a small fraction of the United States and many European countries. This is true. Now, this guy, Taisuke Nakara, he's associate professor of economics and public policy at the University of Tokyo Faculty of Economics. He led a team that tested 6 hypotheses that explain what's going on in Japan. Why such low frickin' numbers? He says one of 6 things: 120-day cycle of outbreaks. Maybe it's just a cycle. People avoiding places with high infection risk, so maybe that's it. Maybe because they're vaccinated. Again, if it's South Korea is doing the same shit. Weather, herd immunity, and that Japan is seeing a low reproduction rate of the coronavirus. They found that the final factor, the low reproduction rate, which represents how many people are infected by one positive case. So if one person affects 3 people, that gives it a high number. But if one person infects only 1 or less, That's a low number. That's what they found, that the final factor, which represents how many people are infected by one positive case, was most probably the only one at play. But they still could not explain why the reproduction rate was low or how it stayed low, even as the government lifted the state of emergency status in October and more people were out in society. How in the F is this happening? The low cases counts in Japan are particularly confounding given the situation in South Korea, which had often experienced similar periods of ebbs and flows. Many of us in South Korea are perplexed by how COVID-19 cases and the deaths are approaching zero in the neighboring country, wrote Lee Duck-hee, professor of preventive medicine. South Korea announced last week it would reimpose social distancing controls as the record spike of coronavirus stymies the country's reopening plans. The announcement came about 45 days since the government began its living with the COVID-19 reopening plan. So here's Japan. That's their spike. And now look it. This is where it is now. That was December 22nd. Look at how low it is. It's almost nothing. And now look at South Korea. Bam! See the difference? Nothing. Bam! How do you explain it? They can't explain it. But the study published this month by Japan's Riken Research Institute, the country's largest scientific research body, found that a genetic feature found in white blood cells of up to 60% of the Japanese people mounts an immune response to the coronavirus. The immune response was seen in 80% of the people with this genetic feature, and researchers found that it may explain one theory about Japan's experience with coronavirus. So maybe that's it. But here's another thing. Here's a weird coincidence. Now, you know I like to watch Dr. John Campbell because he does a daily show about coronavirus and lets you know all about it. And here's what he said about the Japanese miracle.
Now, we want to look today at what can only be called the Japanese miracle, really. Let me just show you some graphics of Japan. It really is quite astounding compared to what we're still going through in the UK, the United States, Europe, other places. Here's the situation in Japan. So here we are now, very, very low cases, having come down from this massive increase here. And we fussed about this a lot and wondered about how dangerous the Olympics were at this time. Now, just looking at this last massive wave, sort of tsunami of cases in Japan, that's that wave in a little more detail. So that's kind of spread out the timeline a bit there. So that's from the 3rd of August to the 12th of September, when the cases were high in Japan. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you must be a very strange coincidence, but let's look at it. Now, this is the date here when ivermectin was allowed as a treatment in Japan, the 13th of August.
This is a weird coinky-dink. This is when they allowed ivermectin to be used to treat coronavirus, COVID-19, in Japan. That's when they did it. So let's watch. Watch this weird coincidence.
Now, if you Google this, if you Google ivermectin Japan, you'll get at the first 30 or 40 or 50 and entrances will be saying that Japan has not approved ivermectin as an official treatment for COVID-19. And that's true, it hasn't. But I'm going to show you why I've got this date on here now. That one there's the 13th of August, ivermectin allowed as a treatment in Japan. So that was the 13th there, that day there. So 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 days. And then the cases started to completely plummet off down to where we are now in Japan. So one of those interesting coincidences. Strangely enough, it's a coincidence that hasn't really been referred to on mainstream Western media.
So that's a coinky-dink. That I cannot say that that's what caused that. We're not allowed to say that. I'm not saying that. But he's pointing it out with a wink, and he's saying it's interesting. You never hear them talk about this coincidence on the mainstream news. They'll never talk about it.
Well, I'll bet they're also not talking about all the gunshot victims that had to wait in line behind the horse.
People in emergency rooms because they took the horse dewormer. So here's another. This is from Trial Site News, which is a scientific thing. Chairman of the Tokyo Metropolitan Medical Association declares during surge, time for ivermectin is now. This is from August 16th. So look at this. The chairman of the Tokyo Metropolitan Medical Association, the chairman, he recently led an emergency press conference on August 13th, declaring the urgent status of the pandemic as Japan is now in its worst surge of COVID-19 pandemic since the onset of the crisis. This was back then. Dr. Ozaki's recent speech, he declared that ivermectin has demonstrated significant benefits in reducing infections and death where the regimen is prophylactically administered for another indication. The head of the Metropolitan Medical Association declared that while clinical trials were important, it was time to greenlight doctors to prescribe ivermectin in association with giving the patient informed consent. And here he is right there. Tokyo's Medical Association chairman holds live press conference. Japan's government is one of the most conservative and cautious in the world. That is, so here's what he...
アフリカでですね、イベルメクチンをそういう年に一度予防的に投与している国と、そうではない国で、こういうふうに見てみますと。
So he's talking about they thought there was going to be a big wave of COVID in Africa and it didn't happen. And he's saying, well, they also give them ivermectin. He's not saying that is what's doing it. He's saying that's correlation doesn't mean causation, but we need to study it. And he said we should make it available to everyone. They did make it available to everyone. And what a coincidence. What a coincidence that they're now having the lowest rates in the world. And no one's ever talking about that coincidence. And by the way, that's not Joe Rogan. That's the chairman of the Tokyo Medical Association. Why don't you call him a crazy right-winger too? You should call him a crazy right-winger nut. Why is he taking horse to? He's telling people to take horse dewormer. Why is he doing that? He sounds like a bad doctor. I wonder how he got to be the chairman of the Tokyo's Medical Association. I also wonder how they got their COVID rates down so low. I guess we'll never know. Kurt, do you have anything? Oh, by the way, I just want to let you know, Pfizer's expect to make $33.5 billion in vaccine revenue in just 2021. Just 2021. Do you know how much the entire recording music industry in the United States generates? Do you know how much money the entire gross product of the recording industry in the United States? $12 billion.
Whoa.
$12 billion. All the recorded music in America in 1 year is worth $12 billion. This one thing is going to give them 33.5. Do you know how much power comes with that kind of money? You can control media. You can control the culture. You can control the narrative. You can control politicians. You can control other industries. That's a lot of effing money. Go ahead, Kurt.
But in fairness, Jimmy, I can't pirate, download, find Pfizer medical drugs. I was going to say, what if we do this? Have a happy medium. We make it so that they can put a copyright on ivermectin and raise it to $3,000 a pill.
I wonder what would happen. I wonder if that would change the science. I wonder if they could make it charge $3,000 a pill. I wonder if that would change the science.
What if they made $35 billion from ivermectin? I'll bet that would make it a lot more look, because we already are Operation Warp Speed on something, right? Like where it's basically a nice way of saying we're experimenting a little bit. You know, That's why you sign a release. So as long as we're doing that, why not experiment with a few things? That's all I think.
Well, here, this is from the Wall Street Journal. Moderna turns its first profit boosted by COVID-19 vaccine. Did you know that? Moderna turned their first profit. Companies' work on vaccines has transformed it in the space of a year. Prospect of a temporary loss of vaccine patents clouds investors' outlook. So they turned a profit for the first time because of this. So,
I don't see how that's connected.
I don't see how any of it's connected. I'm just giving you facts. I'm not putting it together.
What are you,
I'm not making a what's that?
What are you, joining a Trevor Noah death cult?
That's right. I'm not making a declarative statement. I'm not making any of that stuff. I'm not saying ivermectin cures anything. I'm saying it's a weird coincidence. That's what I'm saying. And what's a bigger, weirder thing is that they never mention that coincidence on the news, just like as Dr. John Campbell said.
I like we're looking for like eugenic reasons first. Like maybe something with the Japanese blood cells somehow.
Yes, it's got to be their genetics. It couldn't be. Everybody come see our live stand-up shows. We're coming to Raleigh, North Carolina at the end of January and Philadelphia in February. See you there.